All right, myth and dream. So you probably know, and if you don't, it should be pretty obvious that myth and dream share the similar structures, right? They have profound, odd characters put in a narrative. There's always a narrative, although it may be hard to come by in the dream. But there is a narrative if only things happen one after the other. And so writers have, from the ancient world to now, have been trying to figure out the correlation between myth and dream. Herodotus tried to do this. For example, he wanted to know why so many of the same symbols appeared in dreams from all over the world, the known world then. And that is an odd thing, isn't it? I mean, why would snakes and crosses and old women and young men and all these archetypes, you see where I'm going, appear across cultures? And there's the diffusion theory, of course, that Herodotus actually held to, is that it's cultural interchange. And it may be, I don't know, I don't have an answer or a position on this. I just think the more interesting perspective is Otto Ranks, who said in The Myth of the Birth of the Hero that it's something in us. It's something in the existence, the living of a human life that draws upon the same symbols that appear in our stories and in our unconscious through dreams. So there's a finite collection of symbols in the world. And that's really interesting. And we keep using them over and over. And Carl Jung, who really tapped into this beautifully, said that's an essential element of our psychological growth, is to use these symbols to individuate, to become a self, to become our own unique selves in the world. We have to use the symbols that everybody else has used. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So, sorry, you don't get your own symbol. Sorry. You might. You know what I'm saying. We tend to use the same symbols over and over. Okay. Well, you deserve one, Wendy, if anybody does. All right. So we talked about the unconscious. For Rank and for Carl Jung, these symbols, these similarities across all these stories exist in us in something called the collective unconscious. Now, you know Freud, and he created the notion of the unconscious, but for Freud, it was a very private thing. It was your unconscious, because it was your repressed desires, not anybody else's. You might share some similarities in terms of the drive level, like they might be sexual. In fact, they're always sexual. Sorry, I'm talking about Freud. They're always sexual. But the actual symbols, the archetypes themselves are yours alone. Jung says, and this is what they parted over in 1913. Jung was Freud's most famous and most loved student, and they parted over the nature of the unconscious and the nature of sexuality and individuation. And Jung said, no, he had actually worked with people with schizophrenia, and Jung was wondering why the same symbols kept reappearing. And I've worked in a mental health center too, and it's very, well, it gives you a lot of pause when you work with someone who's having an auditory or visual hallucination, and you know the story. Well, maybe you may not know the story, but you know the symbols. There are angels and devils and snakes, and glorious women and bad men. We know the symbols of the story. You just rearrange them. That was true for Jung, who was struck by this commonality and said, I think I think we're drawing from the same psychological well, and I'm going to call that the collective unconscious. So there's this formal relationship between the myths in that they share the same symbols and they share a narrative structure. And then there's a meaning relationship, and that's where even Jung comes back to the particular, to your story. And that's the beauty, again, of the path, is that we all use the same story, same symbols, and sometimes the same stories, and yet we are on our own unique path. That's kind of amazing thing, an amazing thing to be a human being, and to know that whoever I meet on the street or anywhere else, there's something that ties us together. And it's more than anatomy, you know? It runs deeper than that. Now, you don't have to believe that, but this is kind of our position as a university, is we think that's where interesting things happen. We agree with Carl Jung that there's something collective. We agree with Joseph Campbell that there's something common in our stories that we share, and that to talk about that, to explore those stories and those commonalities and those differences can lead to meaning and ultimately to wisdom. All right. So I always try to give you new words. The oneric, which simply means related to dreams. What was the one on tricksters? It was glossolalia, speaking in tongues, and corporophilia, being in love with shit. Yes. The oneric. This is Joseph Campbell from The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Dream is the personalized myth. Myth, the depersonalized dream. Both myth and dream are symbolic in the same general way of the dynamic of the psyche. But in the dream, the forms are quirked by the particular troubles of the dreamer, whereas in myth, the problems and solutions shown are directly valid for all of humanity. Right? That's pretty good and pretty succinct. Dream is the personalized myth. So it's your story being told to you from a place you can't reach, or can't quite reach. William James called this the unseen order, and the basis of religion, which is adjusting ourselves to this unseen order, harmonizing ourselves with it. Myth is the depersonalized dream. So myth is the story of us. Myth is the story of us. It's that commonality I was talking about just a minute ago. It's what we share. Even if our cultures, our families, our ethnos, where we're from, even if those two have never connected, right? If I grow up in Tennessee and you grow up in Benares and we never meet, we still share something. And that's where myth operates, through those symbols. The unconscious is mythological. All right, even though it's personal, you experience it personally, and even though Jung would say it's a collective, Mircea Eliade, the great scholar of comparative religion, said this in Myth and Reality. The unconscious is mythological, and some of its contents, the unconscious is. So deep inside you is where this connection resides that you can't quite get at because of your conscious mind. The unconscious is mythological, and some of its contents carry cosmic or universal values. They reflect the modalities, processes, and destiny of life and living matter. It can even be said that modern man's only contact with cosmic sacrality, the sacred, is affected by the unconscious, that is brought forth by the unconscious, not affected, effected. Whether in his dreams or in his imaginative life or in the creations that arise out of the unconscious, such as poetry, games, spectacle, etc. Okay, so there's something inside us we can't quite get to. There's something in our culture we can't quite get to. There's something running underneath both. These might be the same thing. A dream, Carl Jung said, is collective. It will, as a rule, contain mythological motifs, combinations of ideas or images which can be found in the myths of one's own folk or in those of other races. The dream will then have a collective meaning, a meaning which is the common property of humanity. Dream is wish fulfillment. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but Freud said that all dreams are a kind of wish fulfillment. You want something. And I don't think that's right necessarily. I'm more of a Jungian myself in that. But the point is, dreams do or can be seen as pointing toward some desire. And I think that's fair to say, that the myths, unless you take a purely reductive biological approach, which is fine, I can't argue against that. But if you don't take that, if you believe there might be something about you and or the culture happening in your dream, then that's your connection. You're connected to the other person, whether you know him or her as not or not. And from that, I think, now this is going to be really fuzzy tonight because we're dealing with dreams, and so dreams are really fuzzy. But from that, when those wish fulfillment dreams move into the unconscious, they become manifest, right? And so now we're talking about stories that make you follow your dreams or your dream, right? So now, making that transition from the unconscious to the conscious is a very tricky thing, as any therapist will tell you, or as anyone who's been to therapy will tell you. It's not an easy voyage. But I think this is what happens, and mythologists and psychologists, some of them think this is what happens, is that when those deep wish fulfillments emerge into the manifest content, emerge into the manifest realm of the conscious mind, you say, I'm going to be an actor. I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be a professor. Or I'm going to be a fireman. Thank the goddess, some people said that, right? All right. So, general overview of the oniric. And now we've got this triangulation we're going to do between myth and film, myth and dream and film. Hang on. All right, so you've heard me talk here before about oral cultures and orality, and how it's basically cultures that don't have writing, and how they are so psychically, and I would say therefore almost materially different because of the technology they use to communicate. For example, we're in an oral culture right now. You're listening to me and I'm speaking. We have a bodily connection. Something is vibrating here in my throat. Something else is vibrating in your ear. I think it's your eardrum, maybe, and my larynx, maybe, whatever. Doesn't matter. We're in a space that is communal and bodily. We're bodily involved in the communication aspect. That changes everything. If I were to say right now, would you take a photo and put it on Instagram, this community immediately dissolves into individuals as you look down at your phone. We don't have to use a phone. All I can do is say, read your notes or read the book in your lap. And suddenly, this world that we are sharing right now dissolves. And you are now in your own world. This is the nature of orality. The person who wrote there were two people really who wrote about orality and literacy in this way, and that is Walter Ong and Marshall McLuhan, actually. And it was Marshall McLuhan who created the concept of the global village that I'm sure you've heard. It gets tossed around all the time, and like many things that get tossed around in popular culture, the full import and context of it aren't really understood. It's like McLuhan when he appears in Annie Hall. Do you remember this scene? And he's like, and some guy's spouting Marshall McLuhan, and Marshall McLuhan walks up and says, "You haven't understood my work at all." By the way, I think McLuhan's the victim of this more than most people because he was so hard to read, and I think he changed his positions many times, but he veiled it. But anyway, we won't get into Marshall McLuhan, other than to say this, and see how this, he wrote this in 1962, see how this resonates with you. The more you create village conditions through technology, and for McLuhan, all technology is an extension of your sensory apparatus. So either your eyes or your ears, technology extends those things into the world. So for example, right there's a camera. It's not on, but it will be tonight. And if I wonder what's happening in the auditorium, I can extend my eyesight through my phone and watch what's happening here. Hopefully nothing. So you see, we've got all kinds of extensions of our senses, and that participates in the global village when we all share in these sensory extensions. So the more you create these village conditions, the more discontinuity and division and diversity. This is McLuhan in 1962. The more you create the global village, the more stratified it becomes. Not the more communal it becomes, just the opposite. Continuing, the global village absolutely ensures maximal disagreement on every point. This is before Twitter. This is before Facebook. The global village absolutely ensures maximal disagreement on all points. And McLuhan was pretty annoyed that global village got treated like this utopian kind of thing. And he continues, "It never occurred to me that uniformity and tranquility were the properties of the global village. I don't approve of the global village. I say we live in it, but I don't approve of it." All right. So we've got orality. We get a new technology called writing, which creates a new psychic reality for us and a new psychic community. It creates, among other things, individualism. I forget who argued this, but one scholar argued, historian of ideas, argued that the individual did not appear until the 17th century. He's being a little coy, but he actually means it. He ascribes it to Descartes' cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Where thinking, not just thinking, but existence is in the individual, in the cogito. I think. Right? That's the birth of the individual. It's not coincidental. I'm sorry, I can't remember the guy. It's not coincidental that that modernism begins there. And modernism is depicted and is defined really by a new epistemology. I'm sorry to use all these words, but a new way of knowing. And so we get Francis Bacon, Descartes, Newton, all at the same time, talking about epistemology. How do we know what we know? And of course, that's when theology begins to be jettisoned in favor of what would become the scientific method. We've got a new technology called writing that changes us dramatically. We can, from writing, and because of writing, we can do things like make lists. There are no lists in oral cultures. And you can stop time, basically, in writing. Because you can write something down and there it is. You've stopped it. It's right there. Guess what? You've also objectified it because it is right there. Your story now isn't part of your breath. So right now, my technology is my breath. It's coming out of me. It's alive. In oral cultures, they would consider that being alive. And the words are alive. And it's an event. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. Because he said it. You see? That's orality right there. That's the power of an oral culture. But if I write it down, God said it. What else you got? Show me something else, right? I'll never forget doing a summer at Yale. And some of you have heard me talk about Leslie Marmon Silko, the great Pueblo writer, a woman who in print kind of recaptures orality in a way that's too complicated for me to try to explain. But she's a Native American writer whose book Ceremony is this amazing blend of orality and literature and literacy. So I'm at Yale doing this thing for 6 weeks, and I go over to see the Beinecke Rare Book Library. And it's amazing. And I'm surprised because I see Silko's manuscript there in a rare book library. It's her manuscript of Ceremony, and she's marked things out, and she's arguing with her editor, and she's doing what authors do with manuscripts. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And then I come around the corner, and on the end display is a Gutenberg Bible, the first printed text in Western culture. The device that was supposed to end storytelling as we knew it, because everything now would be done through books, through objects. And I'm like, wow, look at that. A book about the power of stories, and the story in a book about how storytelling is supposed to end. This one's from 1978. This one's from 1453. This one's still going. The story still goes. We're still in an oral culture. It's just we've been dominated now by secondary orality, what Walter Ong called secondary orality. Now, this is 1982. He's writing. He didn't know about the internet. Nobody did, really. So he's talking about television, but I think the lessons apply. And he says this is a kind of secondary orality, television, media. Except it's not a going back, is it? Why? Because the global village is now part of it. So you've now got these sensory extensions through television where you can do everything except touch and smell, I guess, through television. And now everybody's watching it. That's a secondary orality, but on steroids. I mean, it's a primary orality, but on steroids, and now with images, which is the next point I want to make. We've always used symbols. You can use a phonetic symbol, a spoken word. You can use a symbol in writing, of course, but film is different. And like I said, Ong would have talked about, and McLuhan were talking about television, but we can talk about film. Film is different because Aristotle said that the artistic inclination of all artists is mimesis, is to represent the world. Now, modernism came along and wrecked that, so don't look back through modernism. Just look at that from the ancient world. Everything is mimesis. You're trying to reflect the world. Okay? What better way to reflect the world than taking those symbols and adding time? Taking those symbols, and now we're back to oral symbols, taking those spoken words and adding time and a screen and a spectator position where you're watching but not involved. That's pretty powerful, as the people who watched this knew. There it is. Imagine sitting in the back of the theater in 1892, I think this is, and this comes at you. That's a little too much mimesis for 1892. The story, probably apocryphal, is that people ran to the back of the theater because they thought the train was going to hit them. David, you know this piece, right? The Lumiere brothers. I don't care if the story's true, I get the point. That's why I love myth. It doesn't have to be true, it just has to be meaningful. I get the point, is that we're in a new medium now. This is very different. This is not just a symbol, this is a symbol plus time and a separate medium. Something's changed here. And one of the things it does, or did, before the advent of laptops and devices, is that it recreated community. And it still has that effect, because I know this is waning, but think back to the birth of film and what it did. People came together for this experience. It had been centuries, at the very least, before people came together to hear a story around a light, a kind of fire. Film does that. And still does when you go to the theater. It's a sacred space in which you're experiencing sacred time when you watch a film. All right. All right, dreams. Film studies people have seen this early on. Dream and film, they're very much alike. They're the manipulation of symbols in time in a ritualistic communal setting. Freud said dreams dramatize ideas. All right, that's what film does. Jung said a dream has a dramatic structure. It does. It may not always be clear, but then that's the point of the dream, is you have to figure it out. Let's see. Bertram Lewin's, this is from an article I picked up, Bertram Lewin's research. According to the American analyst, Bertram Lewin, dreams are projected onto a white screen, the dream screen, representing the idea of sleep itself, or better, the desire of sleeping, and contemporaneously the maternal breast, as the infant saw it when falling asleep, once sated. In two communications dated respectively 1946 and 48, Lewin defined the dream screen as a special structure distinguished from the rest of the dream and defined as the blank background upon which the dream picture appears to be projected. I'd never thought of that, but there is a projector in my head when I dream. Where's the image going, right? It's some kind of screen, right? It's two-dimensional, and I guess it's three-dimensional, but it's a screen. But I'm in it. Really interesting. Yeah, I'll just share this with you because I think it's interesting. This is another critic called Baldry. According to Baldry, film is an artificial hallucinatory psychosis. It kind of is. The cinematic apparatus, he says, in fact, presents the spectator with representations, right, images, which offer themselves as perceptions, right? That's why you might run to the back of the theater if you see a train coming. Even more, it creates an impression of reality which has no comparison with the one provided by normal perception. In front of a film, one has the sensation of seeing something more than real. Oh, we know that, hyperreal. For Baudry, it's not the film's imitation of reality. We're not doing mimesis, a varying precision which creates the illusion, but the functioning of the apparatus itself. Spectators, I love this, spectators are like prisoners in Plato's cave. They see only shadows, which moreover are projected by statues, that is to say, not by reality, but by a reproduction of reality. And you guys picked up on this when we talked about Plato's cave. You're like, that's a film screen. Genius. And Analogously, by projecting shadows, cinema creates the same more than real effect that is experienced in dreams. Baudry also subscribes to the belief that the typical conditions of the cinematic situation, that's what he calls it, the cinematic situation, which involves the spectator's passivity and immobility, the lack of the reality proof, you don't know that it's real, you know it's not real, and the darkness of the auditorium are the reasons why the cinematic apparatus almost creates a hallucination. Even more, he believes that the functioning of the cinematic apparatus faithfully reproduces that of the sleeping psychic apparatus. Film and dream, same thing. Same thing. All right. Let's now talk about the Dream Factory, or Hollywood. There's a great new book out by Leo Brody, B-R-A-U-D-Y, called The Hollywood Sign, Fantasy and Reality of an American Icon. And this is part of a series by Yale University Press where writers are writing on national landmarks. So Leo Brody got The Hollywood Sign. He did a brilliant job with it. First of all, it's a sign. Okay, now we've dabbled in postmodernism and poststructuralism here. It's a sign. What does that mean? It means it's part of a linguistic system, right? It means there's nothing behind it. And there's literally nothing behind the Hollywood sign. He says this: the Hollywood sign may be unique among American icons. It's a landmark whose white block letters are familiar around the world as the prime symbol of the movies. Day after day, tourists with cameras wander into surrounding Griffith Park or troll up and down the streets of the Hollywood Hills, looking to position themselves for the best possible angle on the sign. More than any other site in Los Angeles, the Hollywood sign is in the background of your photo, proves you were really here. To moviegoers and many others, the sign represents the earthly home of that otherwise ethereal world of fame, stardom, and celebrity, the goal of American and worldwide aspirations to be in the limelight, to be, like the Hollywood sign itself, instantly recognizable. So it's a sign, it's a symbol. Brody continues. It's a group of letters, a word on the side of a steep hill that, unlike so many other cherished sites, cannot be visited. Have you tried? Yeah, you can't get there unless you break some laws, like some of you would, I know. And remember our old friend Eden Abes, who lived under the second L of the Hollywood sign. How awesome is that? Cannot be visited. I had a Lyft driver who was so upset after he picked me up. He says, a tourist had asked to go to the Hollywood sign, so he took her up Beechwood Canyon and dropped her. And she said, no, I want to go to the sign. He said, ma'am, you can't go to the sign. No, it says right here on the map, the Hollywood sign. And so she gave him a bad review. Its essence is almost entirely abstract, at once the quintessence and mockery of the science of signs itself. Resembling the urge it inspires to the secular form of transcendence, we call fame. The Hollywood sign embodies the American yearning to stand out in the landscape. It reflects the impulse to performance and singularity that has been part of the American psyche since our country first appeared on the world stage in the 18th century. At the same time, its ubiquitous place in the eyes and digital cameras of the world shows how thoroughly that urge and impulse has pervaded so many cultures other than our own. As a character in the German film Kings of the Road says, the Americans have colonized our subconscious. The Hollywood sign immediately evokes the movie capital it looms over, and the configuration of its letters has been imitated by cities and towns everywhere to trumpet their own imitative, mimetic uniqueness. But its mere wordness, its lack of any tangible image that would pin it down and restrict its meaning, that particularly invites the veneration and admiration of the ever hopeful candidate for fame, if only for a snapshot of the moment. I'm just going to continue because he's so good. He's got this down. The Hollywood myth. Perhaps then, quoting Brody again, it is better for this city of multiple cultures, we know that, right? Dynamic difference. It is better for this city of multiple cultures to have multiple icons, or to be poly-iconic, or to use Edmund Wilson's term, mixturous, M-I-X, mixturous. Hollywood has always embodied a myth of centralization and coherence tenuously related to the real physical place. An ill-defined but tenacious idea, like the promise of movies themselves. Icons like the Hollywood sign can pull together contradictions. That's what myth does, by the way. In a world now drowning in a sea of billboards and brands, the Hollywood sign remains the prime visual center for a famously amorphous city and industry. The viewer doesn't pass through such icons to another more spiritual meaning, but stays on their surface, content with the way they gesture to that deeper reality without being too specific about it. Really good stuff here. One more quote from him about the dream and Hollywood. Since its birth as a purely fictional commercial message, you probably know it was originally a subdivision called Hollywood Land. The Hollywood sign has heartily accrued its charisma over almost 90 years, thanks to chance and fate more than premeditation. Instead of heralding one Hollywood, it celebrates them all, and whatever other dreams its viewers might bring to it. Instead of one moment in time, it evokes time in all its layers, binding the future of Hollywood with its past, presiding from its hillside as the genius of the place, anchoring a world of dreams in tons of concrete and steel and a name. All right. There is, yes, brace yourself. There is, in my opinion, no better Los Angeles novel. I don't care about better. I mean, it's just a great Los Angeles novel than Nathaniel West's The Day of the Locust. And it is a novel of Hollywood. You may know it. I don't know. I don't know if it's still read anymore. He has another novel called Miss Lonely Hearts that is brilliant. There it is. And John Schlesinger made a film of it in 1975. We can talk about that if you want. It was originally called The Cheated. The Day of the Locust was originally called The Cheated, and the word cheated appears often in it. Here's the plot. It's not a plot novel. It's a movie. It's a movie in a book, as a book, which is why I wish they hadn't made a movie of it. It's already a movie. He was one of the first writers to use scenes, to think of a novel in terms of scenes instead of chapters or narrative elements. And if you read the book, you'll see it's a film. Here's the plot, so not much to the plot. A man named Homer Simpson, I know, 1946 I think this novel is, Homer Simpson, apparently no relation, meets and falls in love with Faye Greener. Faye Greener is a typical Hollywood actress wannabe, stereotypical, I should say. And Homer is thoroughly outclassed by Faye. And so he joins the many-sided struggle for her affections. Momentarily successful because Harry's death has made Faye financially dependent on him. Harry was her father. Homer soon finds himself spiritually destroyed by her faithlessness and preparing to return to Iowa. I told you they all come from Iowa. Homer's caught in a riot at a Hollywood premiere. A small boy throws a rock at him, and the normally gentle giant is goaded into vicious retaliatory action, whereupon the crowd of locusts turns upon Homer and tears him to pieces. I know. All right, so this is from an article called The Graveyard of Dreams, a study of Nathaniel West's last novel by George M. Pisk. The original manuscript was called The Cheated, and only at the very end did it become The Day of the Locusts. But either one works. The locusts are the ordinary people, the people we've been talking about who came to Los Angeles from Iowa or wherever in search of this dream, this wish fulfillment dream, become conscious, become active. It's a story of Los Angeles that they've followed here, and they still do. And so they wait here, quiescent, lethargic, not moving. But what Nathaniel West saw in Hollywood was something about to burst loose, like a plague of locusts. So let's go through just briefly some of the characters, since it's not really plot-driven. That's the plot. The main character is Todd Hackett. The story is told from his eyes. He's the protagonist. He's a graduate of an Ivy League college and an artist. So he's come to Hollywood as an artist. He has a MFA from Yale or something. And boy, do we know this story, right? Somebody coming from the East or wherever, coming from someone else who comes to Hollywood and wants to ply his trade here in the movies. F. Scott Fitzgerald, William Faulkner, I think Bukowski even, didn't work out. Two different things, right? Writing a novel or being an artist, as Todd was, is not the same as producing a movie. But he gets better. Well, he gets more work, but his art becomes more superficial. It becomes more about illustration and decoration. His friends had told him not to come. They said, you don't want to go to California. You will lose your art, basically, is what they told him. So he does like Goya and some of the other artists who are satirical in nature, and this is going to come back to the end. At the end. Homer's a really interesting character, Homer Simpson. He's an ex-hotel clerk who's developed pneumonia, retired, and gone to California for an extended vacation. We know this story. This is a Los Angeles story. You come here for your health. He's actually a trickster, a kind of holy fool. He's shy and naive and afraid of people. He has no social skills, and he's huge, according to the novel. He has these large muscles, full chest, hands of a giant, and a really small head. He broods, which is to say he dreams. He's always thinking. All these characters are always kind of daydreaming, if you will. The subject of his dream is an Iowa prostitute, Iowa again, named Romola Martin, whom Homer had to evict from the hotel. He runs the hotel. And he finds her drunk and sobbing in her room, broke and desperate, and he goes over and drops his wallet into her lap. This gets misinterpreted, as you might expect. And she offers to repay him in sex for his money. He flees in panic. His dream is of a woman's love, and so he's always reaching wish fulfillment, right, for this woman, but there's no woman for him. There's Romola and there's Faye, and you'll hear about Faye in a minute. But he has this stirring, this instinct within himself that's constantly threatening to blow him up. All right. He's a locust, in other words. He's about to to be let loose. Faye Greener, hopeful of achieving Hollywood stardom, very beautiful, though in a blank, characterless way, monotonous. She just repeats cliches to everyone. Todd is incredibly attracted to her. And he says this, attracted to her but wary of her. He says this, if you threw yourself on Faye, it would be like throwing yourself from the parapet of a skyscraper. You couldn't expect to rise again. Your teeth would be driven into your skull like nails into a pine board, and your back would be broken. You wouldn't even have time to sweat or close your eyes. So, femme fatale, for sure. Faye kind of plays everyone, although I don't think she knows she's doing it. She kind of plays everyone against all the men against each other. She's just trying to get work, like everybody else, right? But Faye's a storyteller. She tells a good story, but they're Hollywood stories, so they're not hers. They're good stories that have no connection to her life. Well, I don't want to get into it too much. Faye's little world of daydreaming is precisely what is attractive to Todd about her. He says he wants to, quote, smash through her egg-like self-sufficiency. So these are not real heroes here. But in the end, this is Faye. The ending of the novel is a painting. Well, actually not the ending. Throughout the novel, Todd is painting his experience of Los Angeles. It's called The Burning of Los Angeles. I know. And in the painting, Faye is a naked girl in the left foreground being chased by a group of men and women who have separated from the main body of this mob. And one of the women is about to hurl a rock at her to bring her down. She's running, her eyes are closed, there's a strange kind of half smile on her lips. She has a dreamy repose. She's running as fast as she can, so she's straining, but her face doesn't reveal the strain. It's almost like she's free, because Hollywood is burning. But she's about to get hit with a rock. One of the other women's about to hurl a rock at her. She doesn't know it. Harry Greener is an old vaudeville comedian. And I think you can probably see how this plays out. He was part of the original industry of entertainment, and now he's trying to adapt to the new industry of film. He can't. He can't get work. He's a Willy Loman who just can't make it in a world that's changed all around him. And then here comes Hollywood itself. Hollywood's a character in this novel. It may even be the main character. And here's our quote. This was the final dumping ground. This is our hyper-reality of Hollywood. He thought of Janvier's Sargasso Sea, just as that imaginary body of water was a history of civilization in the form of a marine junkyard. The studio lot was one in the form of a dream dump, a Sargasso of the imagination. And the dump grew continually, for there wasn't a dream afloat somewhere, which sooner or later would turn upon it, having been first made photographic by plaster, canvas, lath, and paint. Many boats sink and never reach the Sargasso, but no dream ever entirely disappears. This is Nathaniel West's experience of Hollywood as a graveyard of dreams. But unlike a dream, unlike a personal dream, it doesn't go away, because now it's part of the dream factory, right? Catherine Fullerton Gerould said, quote, Hollywood, you see, is not simply a suburb of Los Angeles, it's a suburb of every town in America. Isn't that profound? Because every town in America watches the stories produced here. I've said Dream Factory a couple of times. You may know where that comes from. It's actually an anthropologist who studied the studio system in the 50s, and her name was amazing. Her name was Hortense Powdermaker. And her book is Hollywood, the Dream Factory. An anthropologist looks at the movie makers, not the movie goers, the movie makers. And then finally, or next to finally, is hyperreality. I'm a little over time, so I'm going to just read this to you and we can pick it up later. But hyperreality is a term coined by Jean Baudrillard, the French theorist. And I want you to just read this and think about it, especially in relation to Hollywood, the Dream Factory, dreams themselves, and myths. Whereas representation attempts to absorb simulation by interpreting it as a false representation. This is true, this isn't, this isn't. You say this in words, this is true, this isn't, referring to something that's a false representation. This was Plato's whole gig. Simulation, on the other hand, the Dream Factory, envelops the whole edifice of representation itself and becomes a simulacrum. Such would be the successive phases of the image in this simulacrum. Now think about this in the history of the world. Think about the image, and this is Baudrillard's 5-point history of the image. It's a reflection of a profound reality. It masks and denatures a profound reality. It masks the absence of a profound reality. It has no relation to reality whatsoever. It is its own simulation. And then here, to close, thank you for your patience, is John Springer's article, This is a Riot You're In, Hollywood and American Mass Culture in the Day of the Locust. It has Hollywood, here it is. Hollywood possesses, and this is, think about what we've talked about so far. Hollywood possesses a contradictory cultural identity as both the promised land and the wasteland. A redemptive paradise built upon an ethos of leisure and consumption. It's a paradise. Or the epicenter of a cultural crisis and moral decay. It has often evoked the sense of an ending, not just the terminal point in the historical process of Western expansion, but the conclusion of a journey toward national identity, either the fulfillment or the betrayal of the American dream. For some, Hollywood has been an embodiment of our national character, while for others it's been the center of our cultural influences, which are essentially foreign. And that's in quotation marks for a reason. A contaminating presence, which needs to be censored and contained. We wouldn't know about that, would we? Above all, Hollywood has been America's dream factory, both the center and source of collective fantasies in the movies, and as such, its image has been tied to an ongoing set of arguments over the character of American mass culture. Dynamic differences. LA, Los Angeles stories are stories of dynamic differences within the landscape and among its people. Los Angeles is west of the West. Notice he said something here about the conclusion of a journal toward national identity. This isn't the end of manifest destiny, it's the beginning of something else. It's the beginning of hyperreality. This is the city of angels. We love the sacred. We know how to film it. Thank you for your attention. I'd love to hear what you think about Myth and Dream in Los Angeles.